Hi, welcome to the OT Roundtable, episode 5. Should every OT practitioner be a fieldwork educator? The OT Roundtable is a podcast where we discuss a wide range of topics related to the field of occupational therapy. We are here to shed light on things that are happening within our profession and bring awareness to these topics through raw and honest conversations. So let's meet the roundtable. I'm Michelle with Incorporate Mindfulness, and joining in the conversation with me today, I've got Brock Cook from the Occupied podcast. Brock, how's it going?
Going well. Excited to be here as usual. Thank you very much.
Awesome. And I've also got Sarah Putt from OT for Life. How are you, Sarah?
I am fantastic, ready to talk about our topic today.
Awesome. And we have our awesome guest that we've invited with us today. Her name is Nancy. How are you doing, Nancy?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
You're welcome. We're so excited to have you. So I want to tell our listeners a little bit about you. So you're obviously an occupational therapist, which is why you're here. And you work at a skilled nursing facility. And you have a huge passion for education. So you have your own YouTube channel where you do education for fellow occupational therapists, students, practitioners, or just healthcare workers in general. And so that's why we wanted to bring you on today, is to pick your brain about this topic of what makes a good fieldwork educator.
Absolutely.
You down for this conversation? Okay.
Ready to do it.
Awesome. All right. So I'm gonna ask this question to you first, Nancy. So do you feel like being a fieldwork educator is a skill?
Absolutely, 100%. It's a skill. I do feel that from my personal experience and from having different conversations with other students and other clinicians, I do feel like just like anything else, right? Even being OTs, being managers, anything like that, I do feel like it's a skill that needs to be learned. It needs to be something that, you can get a mentor to learn it, or just from previous experiences from doing it over the years can also give you some skills as well. But I definitely do believe it has to be something that you learn to do so you can be perfect at it.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you feel like it's a learned skill. It's not something necessarily that we're innately good at.
I don't think
Would you
so.
say?
I think certain characteristics can be innate. Like, for example, like just being nice to people, right? That's something that is either you have it or
Hopefully.
and hopefully you can learn that. I mean, I do feel like everything can be learned. If you're willing to put in the time to learn it, absolutely, you can learn to be nice if you wanted to do that. But like I said, it has to be something that you learn to do. Yes.
Okay. What do you guys think?
I think it's something that, I totally agree with that. I think it takes time and experience to kind of figure that out. And it's not something that we all know like right from the get-go. Like, I think, Nancy, what you said is like, yeah, some things we might have right at the beginning and we're pretty good with that. But there are certain things about being a fieldwork educator that really take time, practice, exposure, doing your own research, learning from what others have done, learning from maybe our own experiences, and kind of taking all of that and like molding it into this little ball or whatever you want to call it to make it where we can actually utilize that within our practice and with our students. And I think it takes time to like foster and really develop those skills that they can be adequate, and not just adequate, but like that they can be good for the students in order to foster their own development.
I'll throw this spanner in the works for you then. If people need to learn how to be good fieldwork educators, how do they start in the first place? Because the way I see it is people aren't going to take students unless they feel like they can take students. And if you feel like you can take students, then your perspective is you've already got the skill set to do so. And yes, you're going to then improve that skill set as you do take students. But if you don't feel like you've got the skill set to do it, you're not going to even start. So how does that happen then? I'll throw that spanner in the works for you.
So just from my experience, like I've already mentioned, a lot of the work that I do outside of work is I help a lot of students, and I get a lot of emails from a lot of students, giving me their personal experiences of what's been going on with their personal field works and things like that. From what they're saying and from the many DMs that I've read, a lot of these fieldwork clinicians are taking students not because they necessarily want the students to be there to learn from them. A lot of them are doing it for different reasons. Reasons like the management is asking them to do it. So like the rehab companies asking them to take students. Now, what is the reason for that? Sometimes it's because they have an extra hand to do certain things that they may not have time to do. Maybe even helping with productivity, which is kind of like, does it really help with productivity? Maybe, maybe not, depending on how involved the student is and what kind of roles they're doing and what they're doing. And then I've also have heard from other people saying that I think you can get CEUs from it if you're a clinician. So that's also a thing. So these can be some of the reasons why people will want to take students instead of saying, I'm taking a student because I genuinely want to take a student to help them become better clinicians. So we kind of have to know the reason, the intentions of why they're taking a student, because I think that's what makes the biggest difference.
I've seen a lot of places also will take students because it's almost like a free trial before you buy. So if they are coming up to looking for new clinicians, then why wouldn't you take a student where there's no obligation to keep them on after their placement? But if they're good, then you can sort of headhunt them a little bit. So I've seen that happen as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've seen where I have a couple of friends that are academic fieldwork coordinators, and they've mentioned that they've kind of seen throughout the years where a lot of the, say, bigger organizations, maybe the management will say yes to a student to the universities, but they're not the ones that are necessarily treating the patients. They're not the ones on the ground doing the day-to-day work that would entail supervising the students. And then a lot of times the students will just show up and the supervisors are like, wait, what are you doing here? They had no idea they were coming because it came from a higher up experience. So a lot of times they just kind of are like thrown into it and they're like, okay, maybe I'm ready, maybe I'm not, but it wasn't like they signed on to do it. Their manager or somebody else just said, hey, guess what? You have a student today.
Not good.
No.
Yeah, Nancy, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think a lot of what it comes down to, for me, with a lot of things, is intention. Like, what is my intention of taking on a student? And I think if we are coming from the place of like, I need to get CEUs, or everybody else has had a student and now it's my turn, so I have to take a student, then we're really not approaching it from an angle of really wanting to help someone learn. And so, yeah, I think that was really important that you brought that up as well. Definitely. So if we're talking about learning how to be a good fieldwork educator, what do you feel like are some good places to start? Brock brought up the fact that many people may not feel ready, so they don't take on the role, or they wait, like we're talking about, until they have to be and they're assigned, and then it's not really something they're interested in. What do you guys think would be a way to kind of start that process?
Go ahead, Brock.
No, you're right. I was just going to say, I think to a degree, you kind of need to work out what skills are required to start. So there's some skills that hopefully they already have as a clinician, things like communication skills and that kind of stuff that you need just to be an OT. But I think you kind of need to get your head around, well, what's missing before, like, what else do I need? What else do I need to develop to take a student before you can sort of have a look at what makes good or bad. You kind of need to have, well, what's the bare minimum that I need to start with? And then you can look at sort of improving, because everything can be improved. Like, even, I've been working for a decade. I'm not in clinical practice now, but if I was and I was going to take a student, like, my communication could still be improved. My clinical reasoning could still be improved. Like, everything is one of those lifelong development things. Everything can always get better. But you kind of need to work out is there, or actually, that's probably a better question. Is there certain skills that you need as a clinical educator that we don't naturally have or normally have as a clinician at all? Or is there some that just need, enhancement from a clinician level to a student taking level? Nancy might have a better insight into that than I do at the moment.
I do agree with that. I think that anything can be improved if you're willing to do it. And I think that's the biggest thing. Are you actually willing to become a better clinician, a better fieldwork educator, a better professor, whatever it is? And then if you are willing to do it, then how do I go about doing that? Can I find a mentor, someone who have done it for years that can, give me some tips and tricks on how to do it? Or can I take some classes? I don't know. I think they do have courses on AOTA. I know it's kind of expensive, but if you're willing to invest the money, if you feel like this is something that you're really passionate about and you're willing to spend that money, then why not do it so you can become better? So I think those two things will probably be the best way to go about it.
And I think one of the things that you were just talking about, Brock, about something that we might already have, but we need to improve upon within just kind of our own clinical role, is really learning how to teach and not just tell. So going to our clients, if you're a practitioner, you go to a client and you're just telling them you need to do X, Y, and Z, this is your home exercise program, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's great and fine. But it's not until we actually teach them how to do it that they're going to be able to thrive and be able to do that later on. And I think the same thing goes when we're talking about fieldwork education. It's not just telling our students you have to do X, Y, and Z. It's actually informing them, and it's teaching them how to do these things so then they can embed the skills in the kind of their clinical role. So there's that big difference between just like shoving information down their throat and actually learning the skill of being able to teach them the stuff that they need to know.
I think that's a really good point, and that's something that I saw for many years. The sort of the difference between very new clinical educators and clinicians that have been doing it for years was the very new clinical educators. Their sort of and I'm generalizing, but their perspective on it all was, here, I'll teach you what I do, as opposed to I'll teach you, how things work, and you kind of develop your own sense of who you are as an OT, which is something that, especially in my later years of taking students, was something I was much more focused on. When I think in the earlier years, I was still finding my own feet with regards to that. So it was very much like, you get this referral, here's what I do, here's how I see it, which is fine, but it's not the only way of doing things. It's almost like you're trying to make a little clone of yourself out of the student, as opposed to giving them the conceptual skill work and letting them develop into their own clinician, finding their own way of doing things and realizing that your way isn't the only way. And it's, even though they are a student, then they're fresh eyes with their, in some cases, much more up-to-date knowledge of models and theories and that kind of stuff, compared to, you might not have got any of that stuff since you graduated. It could have been 10 years since you even, I remember the last student I had, they were talking about models I'd never even heard of. I'm like, oh man, I need to pick up a book. So yeah, I see that as a big difference between what I would call a good clinical educator and not a bad one, but a less good one with that.
Do you think that can also be like a power struggle thing? Because I feel like sometimes that can be a huge problem with, I'm the clinician, so therefore I tell you what to do and how to do it. And you're the student, so you're supposed to do what I tell you to do. And then when there's a conflict with that, then it becomes a problem, right? Like, how do we mitigate that? And how do we get to a point where it's like, okay, this is your role as a student, and yes, I am your clinician. However, can we collaborate instead of being more of a dictator type of thing?
I wonder if that same perspective is just the perspective of a new grad, like not even just with students, but with clients as well. Whether they're still, I don't know, just sort of reminiscing way back when I was in that position, but I was still trying to get my head around what the hell am I doing. So it was very much like, okay, you just get your head around, say, one assessment or one intervention, and you're like, all right, so this is how it works. It's very concrete. And then from there, I mean, that's how we learn. You learn it like, this is very concrete. And then you start to get your head around more of the nuance around it, and you can adjust things on the fly or tailor it more to the individual, that kind of thing. I think that same thing would be happening to that clinician's clients as they would be to that clinician's students. And I wonder whether there's a way we can either speed that up. I don't know if there is. I don't think there is. But yeah, I don't think that's necessarily specific to taking students. I think that's more where that person is in their career, I would say.
I think there's a little bit of that. And I also think there's, from the fieldwork educator standpoint, of allowing students to make mistakes, because we can go in and we can pinpoint exactly what needs to be done in any moment to make sure that we get that session exactly how we want it to go. And especially when we're talking about like level 2 students and when they're starting to take over and become more independent, I know for me, I have a very, I have to have this mindset of like, okay, it's time for me to step back. I need to allow them to make mistakes. Of course, safety and on all of that with a reason, right? But I have to allow them to make these mistakes so they can learn. And I think it's hard when you know exactly what should be done to step back and allow the student to learn that and make the mistakes. Because then you're also like, I'm sorry, like, I'm sorry you have to go through this. It's going to be uncomfortable, but you have to learn that. And I think a lot of people get stuck in that battle between, oh, I'll just jump in and save the day, rather than facilitating the growth of the student.
Absolutely.
I think that reminds me of a student that I had, and I don't think she's listening, so I don't think she'll mind. But yeah, I don't know. I never really had an issue with allowing them to make mistakes. I always, even for me, I learn more from making mistakes than I ever do from like just getting everything right all the time. Not that I do that, but I remember I was on an acute mental health ward, and I remember getting this referral from a doctor for a lady who wasn't showering. They're like, she needs a shower assessment. And I immediately was like, she doesn't need a shower assessment. But my student got the referral before I did, and she was like, oh, can I do it? Can I do it? I'm like, yeah, go for it. Go for your life. 2 hours later, she came back and she had all this, she could do it fine. And she came up with all these like visual prompts and stuff to stick on the walls. And I was like, all right, now after you've done all of that, even though it was, 2.5 hours or something, now I can tell you why she doesn't need that. Is one, because I've seen her in other instances around the ward do everything that you would need to do in a shower. I've seen her transfer, I've seen her reach, I've seen her balance, I've seen her do everything that you would need to do in a bath. So we went and actually spoke to her, and it took 5 minutes. And the reason she wasn't showering was because her daughter lived like a couple hours away, and she felt that her daughter would only come and visit her to help her shower. So to her, not showering during the week was encouraging her daughter to come and see her. So we had a chat with her and went, well, if you do the showering yourself, then when your daughter comes, because she's coming anyway, you can do other things. Oh, okay, sweet. Like, it took 5 minutes, but it's like those little things that you don't necessarily, I guess, are aware of as a student that you don't sort of pick up on. Like, I was very used to at that stage, like observing just random things on the ward and like filing them away for later. But I could have taken the route of, before she even went and did the shower assessment, like, no, don't do that. This is how it's going to happen. But I'm like, no, she needs to actually see it. And it's, they do have to do shower assessments at some time. So it's not bad practice for her to go and do it anyway. And it wasn't going to hurt anyone. The client was open to it. It wasn't putting her in a weird position or anything. So yeah, allowing her to do it her way, and then going, well, this is how I would do it. And then letting her see how I would do it. And then, she might have disagreed that my way was right. Or better, or whatever you want to use, which is fine. But being able to see two different ways is, I think, the important thing. So allowing them to not necessarily fail, but do it their own way, at least gives some perspective. It's not just that here's what I do, here's how you have to do it kind of thing. And I had supervisors like that, and obviously I'm not real good at being told what to do in the best of times, so that didn't really go. Let's say I didn't do the best on those placements, but yeah.
I've been thinking about how it's almost like being a fieldwork educator, and I don't have children, but it almost reminds me of like when you're trying to like parent, and it really is kind of a mirror of how you do things. So you start seeing the student respond the way that you respond to your patients and things like that. And so I think one of the biggest skills that you can do to become a good fieldwork educator is to really start to learn more about yourself. So starting to explore like, okay, how do I communicate? Am I good at communicating and giving direct feedback in the moment? Or do I have a hard time giving feedback verbally? Am I better at taking some time to think about it? Those are all certainly things, a learning curve that I had to go through of really understanding my own communication style and somebody else's. So I think probably one of the best things that we can do is really start to explore ourselves a little bit more. And that way we can help our students. I was just thinking, because we were talking about how we really want to set them up for success and really allow them. What I kind of struggled with is so I work with children mostly, is like safety is always kind of an issue, and I think challenging. So what are your guys' thoughts on, I know some fieldwork educators are really hesitant to like teach the student like range of motion, or like really hesitant to teach. I know, yeah, Brock is like shaking his head, but I knew somebody that worked in a hospital, and she was really fearful of letting her students do range of motion when they were in like acute care, because the patient couldn't really respond. And I kind of saw that as a big hindrance, because then it came close to graduating and the student had never practiced. The same thing goes for transferring. You know, if you have a supervisor that's always hovering, then the student doesn't really know how to do that. So I wonder if you guys have had any issues with that as well, like, or how you've navigated safety to make sure that everybody feels competent. Or in my situation, I often have parents watching me. So I'm teaching a student while the parent's watching. But anything that you guys do for safety, because I think that that's a big thing that comes up with students.
Was that a level 2 student or level 1?
So this was a level 2, sadly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I personally haven't had an experience like that. Usually when I do have students, I do allow them to do a lot of things, because I do feel like they need to be ready to go in the field and be clinicians. So therefore, if you don't have range of motion, I mean, they should learn that stuff in school. I know I learned all of those things when I was in school, like how to do range of motions and how to do transfers and all those different things I have. Of course, it's a bit different when you're actually doing it on a person that's, you know, heavy to transfer, or they have different diagnosis and things like that. But as long as I'm giving them the training first, maybe even like the first 3 weeks, you know, do some training with them and then allow them to do it, or maybe do it on me and then, you know, transfer the skills. Anything that's kind of, obviously depends on the student, because some students takes time to learn certain things, and you know, some are a little bit more shy to do things. So I think we should kind of like tailor it based on that particular particular student and their needs and how they learn, because obviously we all learn in different ways, right? Some demos, some actually need to do like hands-on things in order to get it. Some people just look at it and then they're good. So I guess depending on how the student learn, if we can use that to kind of help them get the carryover. And I think that would be the best way to do it, I think.
My next question is, oh, sorry, and Sarah, and you can totally tack on to what Nancy was saying, and maybe you can also add on to this, because I'm really curious, is that how do you instill like the confidence for your patient? So if they are working with a student, I'm really curious how you guys also set up the student to feel confident, because suddenly you're kind of backing off and you want the student to feel confident, and you also really want the patient that you're working with to feel like they're getting a skilled service. So kind of adding that safety piece in. Yeah, I'm curious. And Sarah, I feel like you're the right person to answer both.
I'm ready. Well, actually, and I think my answer that I was going to say originally is going to tie into what you just asked now. So it's kind of one and the same. I think for me, specifically addressing the safety part is talking and explaining everything that I'm doing, especially in the very beginning when I'm working with a client, even when the students say they're in like week 1 or week 2 and they're just doing mainly observation and a little assisting. I am explaining everything that I'm thinking, even if it's not anything like within my realm. If I see a toy that's like 5 feet away and I could perceive somebody coming and tripping on it, I'm going to make note of that and be like, hey, can you go move that, or can you go sit by that, or whatever, like, and I'm going to identify anything that I can see within my environment, and I'm just going to talk. And it's like, the language is good for kids anyway, because they start to hear it. The students picking it up. If the parents there too, cool. They get to hear kind of what's going on in my brain. And I think as I'm sharing all this information, like as the session is unfolding, the students are like, wow, there's a whole lot more going on than just what graph are we looking at, or did they stack 2 blocks, or whatever the actual activity was. And I think that just ties into your question of what you just said, Michelle. It's like, it's talking, it's explaining things, and it's letting the students talk things through. And through that talking, a lot of times they will be able to become more confident in how they express themselves, whether it is to other practitioners, to their supervisors, to the patients, to the caregivers, whoever else is involved. So it's a lot of that just processing, debriefing, explaining, talking, sharing. What would happen if this happened, or what did you think about this? And really just like, I mean, just taking everything apart and allowing that learning process to happen, and allow those questions to come up too. And I think that addresses both that safety, but then also now I'm totally blanking on what it was.
Autonomy? I don't know, like giving them autonomy. Is that a good
confidence? There we go.
And
woo, it just went in and out.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that happens.
This is a question for you guys, because if it's not obvious, I'm not from America. With regards to when you guys have students, where is their insurance from? It does, like, similar to like, I know that like coders fall under the OT's license when they're working. Do students do the same, or is the insurance from the school itself? Because just as you were talking, I'm like, I wonder if that's a difference between countries.
Do either of you guys know? I'm not actually, I would assume it's through the school. I know I signed all these papers. I'm unclear on what I signed. Do you guys have more information on that? Just signed my life away.
Yeah.
I already have student debt. Please don't take me.
Insurance? You mean like what kind of insurance are you talking about? Like a
Like
liability?
indemnity, yeah. So like, if like you were talking about before, with regards to like students doing something wrong, or risk and that kind of stuff. Like if they do something wrong, whose head rolls?
It will be under my license, from what I believe.
See, that's a different. I don't know. Obviously, in America too, you guys have like different rules in different states. But what state are you in, Nancy? Just out of curiosity.
I'm in Maryland.
Okay. I just assume that all OTs are in California, just based on my interactions. Well, not anymore, because Sarah left.
And Utah.
And Utah. Well, yeah, but you're an anomaly.
I'm not in California anymore.
I know, you used to be. I still picture you as a Californian OT.
I feel like a lot of people have been from California.
I just wonder whether that has an impact on it, because in Australia, there's no impact on the supervisor's license. They don't come under the license. They don't have anything to do with the supervisor's registration. The insurance and everything is all paid by the university, and they have to abide by university code of conduct in order to, like, essentially be covered by our insurance. I wonder whether that plays a bigger role in the amount of risk that clinicians are allowing their students to take because it has no bearing on their own license. Whereas I feel like if it did, you'd be probably a little bit more risk averse. Because I was just thinking, like in my, like I'm not going to put students in dangerous situations, but I'm not afraid to let students not fail, but fail. What does Laura call it? Fail forward. Learning opportunity. Create learning opportunity. Fail learn.
Fail learn.
Create learning opportunities for themselves. But I wonder also whether that's because I know it's not going to blow back on me if something does go pear-shaped.
I think the school does, or the schools, and maybe this is different depending on what school they're coming from, but I believe some schools will carry some of the liability. I don't know specifically where that line falls, but I do know that they come in with some protection from the school. But the other big thing, and Brock, this isn't going to matter, or it's different in Australia, but here, depending on the insurance company that the clients and the patients are coming from, some have very strict regulations on oversight of students. And that's like constantly changing. And so anybody that is considering taking students, make sure that you are abiding by your funding source and what they actually allow for student supervision and student interaction with the clients.
Yeah, I think that would like, we still have students that go on like private placements, so they do have like insurance-based work that they do, but it would be, I mean, I'm not in that space, but it would be, I would assume, by far the minority compared to you guys, where it's probably 90% of placements are insurance-based.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to get too off topic, but I'm curious what your guys' Brock, you brought up like failing, if you were to fail a student. I'm just kind of, I know we're talking about, is it a skill to become, or is it a skill to be a good educator? But like, do you think failing a student is also appropriate? Do you think that's, how do we navigate that if we are truly being skillful in the way we're teaching, and is failing a student really providing them the support that they need? I don't know if you guys have any input on that.
I honestly feel like if the student is absolutely not professional, and are doing things that you have probably talked about before, just not following the rules, just being very unsafe, even though you've had numerous conversations about it, then I do think that failing that student is okay to a point. However, I do also feel that if you haven't had a conversation about what not to do, having clear expectations, I think, is the most important thing here. To give that student the expectation, what you expect them to do or not to do, especially the first week, right? We need to set some clear expectations, like, okay, this is what you need to do, this is what you cannot do. If you do this, you can fail, and if you don't do this, you're not going to fail. And for that to be very clearly stated in the first week, so that failure doesn't happen. But of course, if you go through all of these things and the student still does not abide by these rules and guidelines, then of course, I think that at that point, after having conversations, of course, at that point, you can go ahead and do fail them if that's what it mounts up to. Yeah.
100% with the clear expectations. I think that ties into that whole communication piece, and that this is something I preach all the time of how important communication, I mean, with our clients, but with our students. It is so important that our students understand where we're coming from as fieldwork educators, and that they understand, or we understand each other, basically, is what I'm trying to say there. And once you establish those clear expectations, and if the student is not meeting those expectations, and maybe you give some modifications, maybe you adapt some things, and they're still not meeting it, one of the big things that I always try to do when I am having difficulty with a student is get the school involved right from the get-go. Of like, if I feel like there's an issue and it's not being addressed, I let the school know, because I don't want anyone to be shocked at midterm if the student is not passing, or at final if the student is not passing. I want to be extremely straightforward and just transparent with my student and with the school. And also, a lot of times, then the school can get involved and be like, okay, let's set up some additional mentoring, some additional supports for the student. What can we do? Because our role as a fieldwork educator is to support our students to pass. But that doesn't mean that we might have a student that's just struggling. Maybe there's personal issues going on. Maybe it's just not the right setting for them and it just isn't clicking. And really, it's making sure that we do everything in our power as a fieldwork educator to try to get them to that level. But if they don't meet us there, yeah, failure's inevitable at that point, unfortunately. And I wish it wasn't that way, but you got to be realistic.
I think it's interesting because that's another thing that I sort of see differentiating someone who might be a really good clinical educator with someone who might be either a bit green or not as confident in it is exactly that. They're being able to fail a student, which sounds horrible, but I know too many clinical educators or people that have taken students, depending on what they're called in your country, that see failing a student as a reflection of themselves and don't want to do it. Like, God, the school, they're going to be judged by whatever university it is, etc. Whereas it's kind of this delicate balance where, yes, a student can fail because you haven't done your job right, or done enough for them, etc. But also, there's some students, like Sarah said, like it's either not the right setting, it's not clicking, they just don't care about it. Like I've had students like that, like, okay, yeah, especially in mental health, they're like, I didn't want to do a mental health placement. I'm like, well, tough bickies, you're here, so, put your finger out and put the effort in, otherwise you're gonna fail. I think it takes, I wouldn't say brave, but I think it takes an OT that's confident in their ability to deliver the teaching throughout a placement to actually fail a student. Because I think if a clinician isn't 100% confident that they've done everything that they possibly could, I think they're going to be reluctant to actually put fail down on that review, which again isn't doing a service to the profession. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but if you pass students that shouldn't be passed, you're doing a disservice to occupational therapy as a whole.
Yes.
Harsh but fair.
Yeah, I definitely do think that expectation is number one. Like, if it has to be like a weekly thing, a daily thing, just to kind of go over what the problem is, what are you having difficulties with, can we do it in a different way? Do you need more demonstrations? And try to offer as much help as you possibly can to help them if they are struggling. Because like I already mentioned, we all learn differently. So if you can help them to become better, then absolutely do that. But I don't think that clinicians should set students up to fail, because I've heard so many stories, and some actually do some things that is just like, obviously they're going to fail. So we also have a role, just like they have a role as a student, we have a role to do our jobs as clinicians to make sure that they have the training that they need to be successful as well.
And I think it's not always about doing extra. Sometimes it's about doing things different. Like each student learns differently. Like some might thrive in that sort of deep end learning where you're just like, poof, here's a client, here you go, off you go, see how you learn. Others are going to need more support for longer, and then we'll get their head around that sort of independent work and doing things on their own, that kind of thing. But it's a matter of having some way, some graded sort of exposure type way to work out what the student that you currently have needs from you. Like they're all going to, content-wise, they're all going to need very similar, but how you actually deliver that, or how you sort of transition them into that independent working, is going to be different for pretty much all students. And I think a lot of clinicians might struggle in actually working that out. And that comes back to what we were talking about before, about sort of making little clones of yourself. Is this is how I learn, so this is how I'm going to deliver it. Whereas that doesn't work. Not for everyone anyway. It might work for 1 in 10 maybe, but.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you guys have any specific ways that you like to learn your students' way that let me rephrase that. If you guys have a specific way that you set up your sessions or the first time that you meet so that you better understand your students' communication style or like how to give feedback. Something that I really appreciated as a student was, although I really appreciated autonomy and doing things on my own, I really enjoyed having like a weekly, at least at the end of the week, checking in, like what's going well, what's not. And so as a fieldwork educator, I like to right off the bat ask, how do you like to get feedback? Do you want it in the moment? Would you prefer it's after the session, at the end of the day? Do you want to run through things? And I've had a variety. Some students like written feedback and they can take it home and think about it. Some prefer in the moment. So it kind of just depends. But then I also really like to let the student know what my communication style is or how I like feedback. And so I tell them like, you know, I would prefer you tell me in the moment. And if you don't feel comfortable in front of the parent or the patient, maybe away from them, but letting me know right away if you're not feeling comfortable, if you're feeling unsure or something like that. I would prefer that. And even if it's feedback about myself, like, I don't understand why you did that. That doesn't make sense to me. I wouldn't have done that. I actually appreciate that feedback. So I think having that, that open door for communication. Do any of you guys have any specific strategies or ways that you set up with your students, Brock?
I do. I also will do pretty much exactly what you just described. What I do find though is some students, especially if it's one of their first placements, don't know. They're not sure, like, I don't know how I'm going to receive feedback best. One of the things that I like to do is I'll ask them, like, what was your favorite subject so far? And what was your least favorite and why? Because that, to me, tells me, well, like, okay, if you're liking the really practical things, then maybe that's probably how you learn best. If you're liking the highly theoretical things, then maybe that's the kind of content that I'm going to be best delivering to you. So just the same as we do with clients, I guess, is, ask that sort of background information and get to know them a little bit in order to not 100% know, but give me a rough idea of some inkling about how they might learn best or how they might prefer their content delivered, and then try it. Like, if you go, okay, so based on that information, it seems like you like that sort of hands-on type stuff better, then okay, I'll give you some tasks that involve that and see how you go. Not that I'm going to sort of totally neglect the theory side of it, but we'll find a different way to deliver that. Obviously, that sort of lecture format that you were going to at uni wasn't your cup of tea. Let's try it on the fly while you're doing the hands-on stuff or something else. So I just find that sort of background information about how they've learned up until this point used to help me a fair bit in how I can tailor the delivery of information or delivery of learning to them on their placement.
For me, and I'm just going to keep going back to this because, again, it's something that's so important. It's that communication piece. Communication is key to have a successful fieldwork. And something that I try to do from day one is allow the students opportunity to give me feedback. And a lot of times they won't give me feedback right in the beginning, but I open the door and I'm like, hey, it was day one. How did it go? Do you need any modifications? What did you think? Do you have any feedback for me? And a lot of times they're like, that was a great day. And I'm just tired and I'm just processing. I'm like, great. At the end of the week, how did it go? Do you have any feedback for me? So they always know that I'm allowing them to give me feedback. And then at the same time, I'm asking their feedback about how things are going and what's happening with them. So it's really opening that door. So when things get hard, and they will get hard, especially in the level 2s, they will get hard and you'll have some really difficult situations that you have to face. So when things get hard, since we already have established that really good line of communication, I hope that I instill in my students that they can come to me and say, hey, I really need this, or I'd really hope that we could do it this way, or I need a little bit of assistance here. And so they're less afraid to come ask for it because they know that I'm like, here, I'm like, come on, give me whatever you got for me. Like, I want to hear your feedback. And I also then want to be able to give you feedback, and we roll with it, right? It's not like, oh, I just won't say anything because I don't want them to get mad at me, or I don't want to hurt their feelings or anything like that. So again, it's communication. It's establishing that very early on, and then also allowing them to share how they receive feedback or how they just process things. And one of the stories that I always like to share is I had a student one time, and it was early on, and I'm like, man, they're pretty quiet. I can't tell if they're liking this setting. Do they want to be here? And then after a couple of days, they felt comfortable enough to share with me that it takes them a little bit of time to process. And they say that like they go home and they'll like sit and like stare at a wall for an hour and just process what happened that day. And as soon as I knew that, I knew that that student needed time to process. And I'm like, I get it. Like they're just thinking and they're just processing at that moment. But if the student wouldn't have told me that, the whole time I'd be sitting there like, are they even liking being here? Or are they just sitting and not saying anything? So it all goes back to communication.
I really
That's
like
so
that.
huge.
I usually do this. I usually do what I do with my patients, right? Usually when I have a patient, the first thing I do is I need to build rapport with this patient because I'm going to be with them for a while, and I want them to be comfortable enough to come to me and ask me questions, and I want that relationship with them. So that's the same thing I do with my student. If I have a student, I want to make sure that I build a good rapport with them. I want us to have that open communication so they can come to me if they're having any difficulties, if they're having a bad day, like whatever it is. Let me know. Don't feel shy. Don't feel like I'm going to yell at you, be mad at you, whatever. I'm not here to do that. And I let them know straight from the jump because I want them to be as comfortable as possible. If a patient is not comfortable with you, even if it's your child and they're not comfortable with you, they're not going to be able to come to you if there's something wrong with them or if they're having a difficult time with that. So we need to be really careful about that if we are going to take students, to make sure that we have built that rapport with them to begin with and to have that open dialogue with them all the time. Weekly reflections are also something that I usually do. Every week I'll do like a weekly reflection, like how was the week? What did you think about that patient? What do you kind of going through every patient and going through certain things to allow them the opportunity to say whatever they want to say. And I always tell them this is a no judgment zone. Whatever you want to say, I'm not going to be offended. Just say it so we can work on it. So definitely working from a place of I want to help you and I'm here to help you, not to judge you, not to make you feel stupid. I just want to help. So let me know how best I can help you. And that's how I usually do that.
So I just want to piggyback on that whole transparency piece because I think that is huge and I think that is critical. And I think so often on both ends, from the educator side and the student side, when we're having a bad day or something negative happened, say in our personal life, a lot of the times we don't want to bring that into work and have that interfere with what's going on. But there is an ounce of like, be transparent and be real with your student if you're an educator or vice versa. Like, for instance, I have had family members pass away. I've had clients pass away with students when I'm getting the news. And you can't just shove that aside and not have it affect the rest of your day. And rather than be quiet and distant and whatever and just try to shelter my student from it, I bring them in and I'm like, hey, this is the reality of life. This is the reality of the position that you're in right now. Let's talk about it. I'm having a rough day. Maybe you can step it up a little bit and take over a little bit more responsibility today and help me out. And then also the same goes for the student. If they're having a rough day and say they're at the end of their level 2 rotation where they should be doing a lot, but say they're having a rough day and they're like, hey, I'd really like a little assistance. I'm like, I got your back. Like, I'm here for you. We're a team, we're together. And that really just stems from that transparency. And again, the communication of understanding where everybody is at that moment.
I also want
Sarah,
to
I love that. Yeah. Okay.
I also want to mention one more thing that's really important that just kind of came to my head. When we're working with students to think about like learning disabilities, I know that's one thing that we kind of ignore because we're thinking like you an OT, you shouldn't have any learning disabilities, which is far from the truth. A lot of students do have certain learning disabilities, which makes it harder for them to pick up things and do certain things differently. So kind of getting to know them will allow them to open up about certain things like that. Because I know I have people that send me emails and tell me, me and I'm like, are you telling your fieldwork instructor this because you're telling me this, but I hope you're telling them too, just so they know, hey, I have this disability. Or even if you don't want to tell them, I learned things differently and I learned it this way and I learned it that way. Can you please do it that way for me so that it will be easier for me to get it? So we need to also keep that in mind, like the different barriers that can be preventing that student from being able to do what they need to do.
And also, if they do have a different ability, using that as a strength, because I've had students that have come in that have had some different abilities and they connect with clients in ways that I never would be able to. And it is absolutely amazing to sit back and watch. And I remember I had this one student and they wanted to do this one thing with another student, and they had kind of similar disabilities, and I was just like, I don't know if this is going to work, but I didn't say anything, and I'm like, I'm going to let them figure it out. And it was amazing. I sat back, I didn't say a word, and the most magical thing happened, and the client was happy and the student was happy, and I was like, that's a strength right there. Like, and that's something that I couldn't have done. So understanding if they need help because of a disability, but then also understanding that it can be a strength too when they are working with our clients.
Absolutely.
I have seriously had so many aha moments with you guys talking, and I think coming back to that transparency piece, I think that's so huge. I'm also a big fan of like dialoguing everything I do. Sarah, you brought that up, and I thought that was. I think it's helpful for the patient to know why you're doing it. I think it's helpful for the student to understand why you're doing what you're doing. I think so. We've talked a lot about, I think, the traits that make a good fieldwork educator. And based on your guys' responses, I'd say you're doing pretty good, like in everything that I'm hearing. What I did want to tack on with the boundary piece, Sarah, that I do think that actually is really healthy to just be transparent of like, hey, if I'm more quiet today, I just want you to know, like, I'm not feeling great, or this happened in my family. And I think just in general in our society, I think we do need to be a little bit more transparent. I think that really helps, because I think as a student, when you're already feeling vulnerable, and if your supervisor is kind of in a funk, like you can tell that they're in a bad mood, you may take it personally. And I know that that's something that I've done, is like, oh, she thinks I suck, or I did that terrible, or imposter syndrome. We've had Brock's laughing, but that's where my mind goes, and I think you're being really vulnerable when you're a student. So I think just being really transparent, and then it allows them the opportunity to be vulnerable as well. So and that's very different than unloading all of your personal baggage, right? Obviously. So I really appreciate that.
But I also think that that's an important skill for people to learn as well. That's something I hammer home to my students till they're sick of it, is that self-reflection and being self-aware of where you're at going into a therapy session or a day at work is so ridiculously important. And I know, like, a lot of the time, again, I harp on about it, it's from a mental health perspective. But I think that that's the same in all clinical situations, that self-reflection skill. And as a supervisor, I think setting that up for them to actually give them the space to sit and go, okay, so how am I going today? What's going on for me today? Is a good way to learn that as well. So it's not just, you're making the space to set up the learning. That is part of the learning. That's a really important skill for clinicians to have. So I think that's an awesome way of doing it.
I think, I don't know, this might be a generalization, but I think some of the fieldwork educators that are the most challenging, meaning like that they maybe don't enjoy it and it's a really challenging experience for the student, I would argue that those are the therapists that are less aware of themselves, maybe. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe on the other end of like consumed with themselves, where they really want things done their own way. But I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from this conversation, is if you're self-aware and you're aware enough to know how much feedback to give, your therapeutic use of self, then it really is supportive. And if you're not willing to go there, then maybe not a good option to take a student. I think do you guys feel like that's safe to say, that, as a clinician, you can say, I'm not in a place where it's good for me to take a student, and I need to take some time to reflect.
I
I'm
think
seeing
that
some
you
nods,
should.
but people in the
Yeah.
podcast don't know you're nodding. I got a thumbs up.
You definitely, like, you should, if you're not in a place, even if it's just, you know, for this particular semester, I've got all this stuff going on, I'm not in a place, then you are better off not having a student than doing a shit job with a student. Like,
Yeah.
have a semester off, take a student the next time that you're actually ready and prepared, and, you know, have the capacity to put the work into actually having the student rather than just phone one in, because that's not fair on whichever student you end up getting is if they come to you and you're in that sort of just phone it in stage. Like, it's not fair on them, and it's not fair on the profession.
Yeah.
So
even with COVID, I had so many students ask me if they can come shadow me. And I'm like, one, you probably can't because of COVID. Two, I was not in the mental, what do you call it? Mental thought, like my
space.
mind, space. I was not in a mental space to even take a student. I'm like, I cannot take a student because I'm a mess myself. I have patients dying left and right. I can't think. I cannot have anybody here trying to learn from me. Like, I cannot do that. So I think it's good for us to know ourselves, definitely, to kind of make these decisions and make the right decisions. Definitely. Yes.
Yeah, I completely relate with that too, because I have always been taking students, even like really, really early on. It was embedded in my practice at the clinic that I started at. But then when I started my own private practice, it had been a little while that I hadn't taken students, and I really wanted to get back to taking it. But because I was building my practice off the ground and I was getting things going, I'm like, there is no way, like no student wants to see this hot mess that I'm dealing with right now. And so I had the wherewithal to just be like, all right, I'm going to put pause on my fieldwork education right now. But as soon as I get that caseload and I'm kind of like feeling my own jam there a little bit, I'm like, all right, I can start taking a student again. And it's funny because I actually got this question today from somebody that was like, I'm feeling a little burnt out and I'm just kind of stuck in a rut right now. And then they were like, maybe if I took a student, it might help me. And my immediate thought process was like, yes, take a student. Being a fieldwork educator is great. But then I took a step back and I'm like, but you need to recognize where you're at. You need to recognize, will you get time? Will you get extra time outside of direct clinical care within your organization to work with the students? Are you going to physically and mentally be able to handle the additional roles and stresses that come with taking a student? So as much as I'm a big proponent for everybody to be a fieldwork educator that wants to be, I'm also very, very realistic of but you also have to know yourself. And even the best fieldwork educators might not be able to take students all the time, given COVID, given whatever is happening during that point in time. So it's really understanding where you are as an educator or want to be educator, and understanding is this something that I can handle right now? Or do I need to wait 6 months or a year or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
I love that you said that, because I think it goes back to the intention that we first talked about. Why am I taking a student? What is the intention behind me taking a student? And if that intention is anything apart from the fact that you want to help a student to become a good clinician once they graduate, then you shouldn't do it, because then it's not going to help. The student is going to be miserable. You're going to be miserable doing it. So there's no point,
Mm-hmm.
Come full
Nancy, I
circle.
feel like doing a mic drop. I feel like I love doing snaps. I would do a mic drop. Yes. Yes. To all of that. I 100% agree. And I don't think I could say it any better. Yeah. I think knowing where you're at, and if you're not in a place, being willing to say no. And I think that took a lot of courage, Nancy, for you to say during COVID, this is not the time for me. And I think that does take a lot of courage. So if you are a fieldwork educator, you're being asked, I think my feedback would be for our listeners to feel comfortable telling their supervisor where they're at. Also having that transparency of in my personal life, I'm not at a place that I can. I would love to take a student, when I'm able. Transparency, people. This is what, transparency. Oh, I'm getting some claps. So does anybody have any resources? If you have any resources that you like or that you feel like would be helpful to share with our listeners, feel free to chime in. Sarah, do you have any you want to share?
Yeah, I think Nancy, you touched on it right in the beginning of the conversation, but there is like AOTA has a bunch of different resources for fieldwork education. If you just go to their website, there is a ton. Level 1, level 2, there's a fieldwork educator certificate program that AOTA offers, but also be in contact with the university that you're getting students from, because I know for me, the university that I accept students from, they do a lot of education for the fieldwork educators. And I go to all of them, or I did go to all of them. Now I attend virtually. And it's really important to learn about different communication styles, stay up to date on the research, on everything that's kind of coming out in the academic land, because there have been changes, and there are going to be a lot of changes with some of the programs and how they're structured. So definitely AOTA, there's the certificate program, and there's also a Facebook group. There's a Fieldwork Educators Facebook group. We can link to that in the show notes. And I know a lot of questions will get asked around there. But yeah, find support, find resources, because it's out there.
I think coming from academic land,
You like
I,
that?
I haven't heard it before, but I'll take it. I would say, yeah, exactly what you said. Like, obviously, AOTA is not much use to me here, but get in contact with your local university or where the placements are going to be coming from, because it doesn't matter what country you're in. If like most universities are screaming for educators, I don't know of anyone that said, "Nah, we got plenty. Don't worry about it." So if you get in contact with them, say, "Listen, I'm keen, but I feel like I need some like upskilling or something." If they don't have the resources that they run, then they'll be able to point you in the right direction. So I'd say just get in contact with your local university, the OT school at your local university or your state's university or wherever you are.
I think adding to that, I think if you're a little bit nervous to kind of take a student, I think one thing, what I did was I started doing it with allowing students to shadow me. And I think doing the shadowing kind of gave me a little bit of experience on what to do if I had a student, kind of getting my feet wet a little bit. So starting that way can be great for you if you're kind of, nervous to kind of go full in. Mentorship is always a good idea, to get a mentor, someone who have already done it, who have taken students, to kind of get in contact with them and say, hey, how did you do it? And kind of getting some tips and tricks from them. And courses, like Sarah already mentioned, if you want to take a course, AOTA do have a course. It is a little expensive, though, I'm not going to lie. But that's available if you want to go that route and get more of a formal thing going. What else? I think that's pretty much it.
That just reminded me of just then when you were saying that, is that I know it might not be the same in the States because your courses are shorter because they're masters and above, but a lot of the bachelor's courses and stuff in other countries will have placements earlier on in the degree, which are kind of like shadowing. So I know like our course and a lot of the other courses in my state will have like 1 week observational placements for the first years. So generally, when we're setting up clinicians in the health service to start taking students, we'll start them with those. So, there's not a lot of assessment of the student that the clinician needs to do, but they get used to, having another person follow them around and just get used to being able to try and convey what they're doing and explain what they're doing to someone else. So it can be, if you're local, again, get in touch with your local university. They'll explain what options you've got. It's not always just the big, 10 to 15 weeks, depending on where you are, placements where you have to get them ready to be practicing as a clinician. There are usually some other options throughout the degree that you might be able to start with and at least sort of ease your way into it.
Yeah, I know, because I started looking into getting my doctorate, and a lot of the courses have like elective that you can take, like electives on different things. I think that AOTA should think about adding some kind of elective when you're going to OT school. If you want to be a fieldwork educator, take this course or this one class, or whatever, to kind of get people a little bit more exposure to what it may look like, even though it's not the same thing, obviously, but at least they can get some idea.
How will they make money then?
How will they make money? Right.
I'm allowed to say that because I'm in a different country, so it's fine. All of the rest of you, keep quiet. Don't say anything.
Right. I don't, yeah. Right.
No comment.
I don't think about it from a money perspective, but obviously they do. So
I'm just staying on mute. That's what I'm just going to.
That's safe.
I'm glad I have this mute button. That's helpful. Yeah, I'm just going to keep clicking that.
One more thing that I was going to throw into is also conferences, because a lot of times there might be presenters that will come and talk about fieldwork education. I know AOTA, when we get back to resuming in-person conferences, I believe there's a pre-conference institute. It's like a full day all about fieldwork education. And then there's some various short courses and presentations and posters sprinkled throughout the conference. So that's another great way to start getting connected to the resources and the information that's out there as well. So when you go to conferences or if you're attending virtually, like double check and see if there are anything specifically for fieldwork education.
A book that I really enjoyed that I think just helpful in life for communication is Crucial Conversations. The book, it's an oldie but a goodie. I don't know if you guys have read it, but it actually has not heard of Crucial Conversations, Nancy? Okay, you guys have it. Oh my gosh, it's actually sitting here in my office. I feel like I should hold it up, but then I'd have to rummage through my box of books. But anyway, it has specific ways to just communicate, especially during challenging conversations. And it even has kind of like flow charts, like, okay, where do you start? And one of the biggest pieces is like create a place of safety, like where the person feels comfortable talking with you, which we've already touched on. So we'll also link that. It's so you guys can check it out. Nancy, this has been so much fun. I want to thank you from all of us at the roundtable for coming. I've certainly loved this conversation, and I feel like it's actually really re-inspired me to take on a student again. So thank you so much for coming and chatting with us.
absolutely, you're welcome. Thank you guys so much for having me. I really do appreciate it. This is good.
And where can people find you if they're looking to learn a little bit more about you?
Okay, so I'm on YouTube, Lovely OT on YouTube, and I am also on Instagram, Lovely with 2 Y's _OT on Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Extra lovely. You need 2 Y's. She's too lovely. She needs 2. Okay, I love that. Okay, and then Sarah, what about you? Where can we find you?
You can find me at otforlife.com, and this has been amazing, and I'm sure you guys can just tell like my passion level just like went through the roof because I love talking about fieldwork education and I love talking about students. And I think I want to end with something that when this happens, it just makes my day. When my students come to me and they tell me that when they become a practitioner that they want to take students, I'm like, my job is done. Like that means I did a good job. I've instilled that into them. And hopefully if we can continue to promote really good learning opportunities and education for our students, that can kind of continue on throughout and just really do good for the profession. So I'll end with
all right. So you deserve a mic drop too. I mean, snaps all you guys. I'm loving this. That's awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Okay. And Brock, where can we find you?
You can find me at occupiedpodcast.com. All the links and everything are all there. I was expecting Sarah to go, when I grow up, I want to be just like you, Sarah. That's what I'd probably say. But yeah, no, it's been really fun. Thanks a lot, guys. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, and you guys can find me at incorporatemindfulness.com. And when I grow up, I do want to be Sarah. All right. If you guys,
not about me. All right. It's what would you guys do? Like, that's what I tell my students when they're like, well, what would Sarah do? I'm like, no. It's what would you do in this situation? So
I need that on a bracelet. What would Sarah do?
That's a sign of a good fieldwork educator, Sarah, not making it about you. Proud of you. All right. So if you guys enjoyed this episode, like and share the podcast with a friend. And if you want to get in touch with the OT Roundtable, head over to otroundtable.com. Thanks for joining us.